What if we could save millions of euros of healthcare costs while also improving the treatment in these inflammatory diseases? Good afternoon. My name is Tom Konings and I'm a member of Team T.E.S.T. By now we all know that adalimumab is a very effective treatment in rheumatoid arthritis. But I should mention that it's also very effective in other inflammatory diseases of the eyes, of the skin, and also of the bowels. However, there are two main problems with adalimumab treatment. Firstly, adalimumab is expensive. And this is therefore adalimumab is expensive. Adalimumab is expensive, and it would be good if we could lower patients' dosages just a bit to exactly the right dose, because this would save a lot of healthcare costs. And secondly, a lot of patients, a significant number of patients, do not get the desired effect of the drug. Which is due to individual difference between patients. Optimally, we would measure how a patient responds to the drug, a process that's called therapeutic drug monitoring. However, current methods for analysis are suboptimal as they are too time-consuming and they're actually rather invasive. This is where Team T.E.S.T comes in with their solution. We developed a new biochemical assay that enables the measurement of adalimumab in under 5 minutes. On top of this, we do not require any laboratory skills for the measurement, which means that anyone can perform it. And all that it takes is a finger prick blood sample, which makes this the perfect tool for therapeutic drug monitoring in the hospital, at the GP, or at home. So how could we implement such a solution? Well, right now in rheumatoid arthritis, therapeutic drug monitoring still lacks the clinical evidence to support its benefits. This would mean that we would first need to go through an extended clinical research phase to implement. And that takes time, no revenue is generated, and that makes this market unsustainable for initial launch. Therefore, Team T.E.S.T has decided to initially focus on another market, which is inflammatory bowel diseases. In inflammatory bowel diseases, there is already an established clinical relevance of therapeutic drug monitoring. And therefore, we only need to go through a validation step, proving our sensor to be more accurate than the available alternatives. And from there, we can enter the market, which makes this market just far more sustainable for our initial product development in the first years. Already we set up cooperations, by the way, with medical practitioners in the south of the Netherlands who are willing to help validate our sensor and eventually set up clinical studies. Our sensor will reduce healthcare costs in 3 ways. Firstly, costing only €5 per measurement, our sensor will be twice as cheap as the already available alternatives. On top of this, we do not require any laboratory personnel, which makes it even cheaper per measurement. Secondly, if our sensor succeeds, we expect to reduce adalimumab consumption by at least 5%, which would translate to €2.5 million of healthcare cost savings per year in the Netherlands. On top of this, we expect that we can reduce indirect costs of adalimumab treatment by increasing efficiency in consultations, treatment, and hospital admissions. So, twice as cheap. It will reduce adalimumab consumption, saving healthcare costs, and it will reduce indirect costs of adalimumab consumption. So to summarize, we developed a new solution to measure adalimumab in the blood. We intend to implement this solution in inflammatory bowel diseases and its therapeutic drug monitoring. And as a last remark, I want to add that our sensor will not just be able to measure adalimumab. With minor adjustments, we can tailor it to measuring other antibodies as well. This huge potential for upscaling and our great results today in the analytical performance are what make our sensor unique. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your pitch. Are there any questions from the jury members? Yes.
Thanks. I really like the comparison, or first looking at the bowel, irritating bowel syndrome. Yeah. But I was also wondering, in your documentation, you said you would reach every patient, and every patient is going to use it, which is quite ambitious.
It's the best case scenario, yes.
It's how are you going to reach that best case scenario?
Well, we do not really need the best case scenario. So I should explain that what we intend to do is to produce our device at a €300 cost. We want to lease this device for free to hospitals, so meaning that we can actually really fastly implement. And then our idea is that we sell at we ask for a €5 fee per measurement. So what we need, if you include the production cost of the chip, we actually need 70 measurements to per device that we produce and lease. We need 70 measurements to earn back that investment that we did. But as you can expect, 70 measurements with this device is not a lot. We expect that we will do far more measurements. In the document that we wrote, we thought we would perhaps lease this device to the hospitals for 4 patients to use this, for example. Well, then very quickly you get 70 measurements out of it. You would expect if you can have 10 patients using one device that you very easily reach in the hundreds of measurements. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I understood it correctly, patients can also measure at home.
That is an option. Our idea is that it would be most efficient for everyone involved, if we would primarily lease the device to hospitals, and then on indication, if a doctor deems it worthwhile, that device is perhaps introduced at home, if this is allowed. But yeah, that's of course takes regulatory steps.
Okay, so that's optional.
Yes, we would actually already gain. So it would be cheaper, and it would be much more time efficient than current methods if we measure in the hospital. Something else I need to add, because you referred to inflammatory bowel diseases. In inflammatory bowel diseases, the relevance of therapeutic drug monitoring is just that much greater when compared to rheumatoid arthritis. In rheumatoid arthritis, we measure we measure the clinical response not typically by measuring how much drug someone has in their blood. We see whether the drug works when they have when a patient has no symptoms. And in inflammatory bowel diseases, drug monitoring is relevant because we cannot as easily see whether a patient has a good effect of the drug. And we are interested to know how much of the drug does a patient have when they still are having symptoms. So this is why, we chose this.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation and your nice pitch. I think you have a wonderful point-of-care test for both outpatient clinics testing and at home, monitoring at home, which is, I think, essential for point-of-care testing, especially in inflammatory bowel disease, when patients are still young and in their working life, and don't have always time to come to the hospital. So.
Right.
What are the thoughts about the team about communication of results to a healthcare provider when you do your test at home?
When it is done at home, we would think that optimally there is always clinical assessment by a doctor combined with the measurement. So we never want to, we don't think it's productive and healthy for a patient to decide on their own medication dosages just based on their measurements. So what we always want to do is indeed communicate the results to a medical practitioner, be it the GP or the gastroenterologist. And how we intend to do this would be either software-based, or another strategy would be, if it's actually a more demanding case, that a nurse practitioner in the Netherlands, is possible, would go to the patient. But this is all just future talking, right? But still, if it's a demanding case where a patient is really suffering, then you could imagine such a solution. But software could definitely work. There are so many solutions already that use software to communicate.
Thank you. I think you should really focus on at-home monitoring. So good luck with that.
Yeah, it's something that we want to definitely move toward, but it seems like to implement initially in at-home monitoring is a tough step for a startup.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. As with everyone, I really like the idea that the sensor can do more than what you were tasked to do, and it's very good to have recognized that. But it makes the business model or how you're going to deliver this a bit confused in my head. So can you elaborate a bit on, well, if you start with TDM, for example, and then you want to go to RA, and then you want to go to something else, how long does that take? How do you do that, and who do you talk to do that?
So firstly, we are trying to see if we can, as soon as the sensor is confirmed to work, which is a point we have reached right now, we seem to have reached, we want to validate the sensor by comparing it to currently existing ones. And at that point, there is already a very huge interest from the gastroenterologists who want to implement this sensor in monitoring of inflammatory bowel diseases. So that's definitely something that we can start with rather low investment, which makes this actually realistic, because starting out in rheumatoid arthritis, it's just not realistic right now. It would take so much clinical research on a drug that's actually, well, it remains to be seen whether it's actually interesting to invest in research on that drug in the context of rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, so definitely we want to start out in inflammatory bowel diseases. Huge interest in that field, and from there, if the sensor works well there, we expect that in rheumatoid arthritis we can also save healthcare costs. We can also optimize treatment. So that will be inflammatory bowel disease will be our stepping stone to other markets as well. Sorry,
I'm sorry. Maybe I wasn't too clear on that, but yeah. It's just I was wondering, practically, how much money would you need, and when are you going to go into the RA market, if ever? If TDM works and you're developing something, it might take 10 years for you to go into RA.
I don't think it necessarily would take longer for us to enter the RA market just because we initially focus on IBD. I don't think that's the case, because we can already look into the setting up clinical studies in the RA context as well. But we can do that on parallel. But only if desirable to do so. We intend to start in IBD. And how long will it take? Well, it depends on how well our sensor does in the IBD context initially. Yeah.
Okay, I see one more question over here.
Not really a question, but a remark. IBD patients are younger, like I said earlier, but what you said is very important. The exposure-response relationship for adalimumab as a drug to work is very much better in IBD than in rheumatoid arthritis. So I fully agree with you.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions from the jury members? Yes.
I like it very much to go for a beachhead market as we go with as fast as possible to get going.
Yes.
Considering the savings, have you been talking to insurance companies, and if so, what is the response to this approach?
Yes, we have. We talked to Zilveren Kruis. They were very enthusiastic about this approach, because it's not even a smaller market per se. It's actually a really significant market to look into. So from a health cost savings perspectives, IBD is also a relevant target, besides being relevant just for the clinical relevance of it. As I described, how therapeutic drug monitoring of IBD is very clinically relevant, because symptoms you cannot really track easily, and there are far less treatment options available. So from a market perspective, it's also very feasible according to insurance companies. Yeah.
Okay, then we have room for one more quick last question, if there are any. I saw some in the audience, also over here.
Thanks very much, Ton. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Being a family doctor, I may be one of the future users of your device. I'm really looking forward to that. One question I have is that regards a particular trend in medicine, where, as you may have seen yourself, where we increasingly use diagnostic devices as a kind of therapy, and for vice versa, where we use therapies as a kind of, let's say, diagnostic device. And the second one might relate to your device, where I can imagine that once you are, let's say, trying to diagnose bowel diseases, as you just illustrated, that once it comes out from, let's say, your device that a particular patient is not suffering from an IBD, then could it be that, let's say, the next step will be something like searching for bowel cancer? Just as an example, which is quite relevant nowadays.
So it seems that that completely actually depends on what is the assessment of the doctor who is informed about the measurement. So the patient would measure, for example, that their adalimumab concentration is outside the therapeutic window and is actually too low, right? So then what is the next step? Well, this doesn't have to mean anything about whether there's illness or not, but you're saying in the scenario that there are still, in your question, you're saying that the patient has symptoms, but the...
Well, let me just illustrate. One of the problems in medicine nowadays is talking about cancer, which is a bit different from what you just talked about, of course, is that we are always late. So doctors should, let's say, do much better than we do until now. There's just a few cancers that we diagnose quickly enough and early enough. And the rest is just waiting for a doctor to, let's say, think about it and try to diagnose it. And IBD is an example of one of those, let's say, diagnostic pitfalls.
Yes.
Where we might, as doctors, let's say, concentrate on a particular disease, keep searching for it, keep finding proof, while at the same time patient is suffering from, let's say, a very important, particularly different disease like cancer.
Yes, yes.
So that's a spectrum I'm struggling with every day. Every day I'm seeing patients.
Yes, I suppose that this device may help that situation in some sense, because it would give a better clue as to whether the anti-inflammatory treatment is adequate. So at that point, if a patient is still experiencing symptoms even though their treatment is accurate, then that's another reason for the doctor to wonder, could there be something else?
Yeah, thank you.